All right, I will say good morning. Let's begin. A lot to do today. So a long dapim of Gemara. Beautiful, big zechus. More words, more Torah. Okay, so we'll say today's daf is Kuf Tesvav 115. We are picking up Kuf Yodalad 114 at the Mishnah. So an interesting sugya. Hamakir Kelav Usvara Biadacher. We'll say, so imagine this scene. I recognize my utensils or my svarim in the hands of someone else. In other words, that someone else is holding on to my property. The Yatsa Lo Shin Gneva Beer, and Rabbi say again, people knew that I had experienced the burglary, meaning it was known that my home was burglarized. So what happens? Yishava Lo Belokeach, L'Shava Lo Lokeach, Kamma Nasan, V'Yito. So both say the Lokeach, the purchaser. So this is actually interesting. So the Mishnah assumes that the person who has the items is not automatically assumed to be a thief. Meaning we assume that the person who's in possession of the items quite possibly bought it from the thief. So what happens? So the purchaser will call him, goes ahead and swears how much he paid for the property, the yitol. And Abba say, ultimately me, the owner of the property, am chayiv to go ahead and pay him back for the amount that he spent. The time I can take my property. So we'll say, see here the incredible novelty. So I'm paying for my own property, right? So meaning, I'm walking in the street, I see Ruvain holding my watch, wearing my watch. It's a beautiful watch. Funny, I just lost the same one. He said, I just bought it. So it turns out that that's my watch. So Ruvain swears he paid $100 for it. I pay him $100 and I take back my property. Ve'im lav. But I will say, ultimately, again, if not means if there was no shmua, if there was no rumor in the city or no news circulating about a burglary in my home, lav kol heimena. So I'll say I am not believed to say that is my stolen property. Shani omer machra la'acher v'lakhan zehemena. Because I say I say in that kind of case where there was no talk about a robbery in my home, then it's just as probable that I sold it. I have seller's remorse. And ultimately, Reuven bought it from another individual. Fine, says the Gemara. So even if there was a rumor, when I say rumor, it's not really. If there was news circulating about a robbery in my home, and that news was circulating throughout the city, my havi, I will say, why should that allow me to take the object back from the lokeach? Maybe I sold the watch, and I circulated the rumor in order to go ahead and be able to get my watch back. So because what's the case? The case where I had people staying in my home, and I started yelling in the middle of the night, my property has been stolen. In other words, that there are witnesses, there are Eden there, that I called out that my property was stolen. Says the Gemara, Kol Shekain Ilamatzah. All the more so, it could be that I'm using my overnight company as a pretext to create a false rumor that I was robbed when in fact it wasn't. I will say, why would I make up a rumor that I was robbed when I wasn't? It becomes my alibi to get back my sold property. I have regret that I sold my watch. I can't get it back because I can't reverse the sale. But if I claim that it was stolen, then Lamaisa, again, that gives me a leg to stand on. So the Gemara says, Rav Kahana Mesayim B'Mishnei Derav, Ki gon shaitza machteres chatura b'soch beso, u'bnei adam shalanu b'soch beso yatzu, va'an bor karos shal kelim al kisveim. So we'll say, what's the case? The case is where they found tunnels dug into my home, and the people who were staying in my house were seen leaving my house through the tunnels with bags filled with my stuff on their shoulders. So that's a pretty good, that's a pretty good indication that I've been robbed. So it says, and everyone says that, Plony's home was robbed. So I'll say, so maybe they only stole kalim, they didn't steal svarim, yet the Mishnah says kalim and svarim. Where the Shmur Rabbo said that went out said that both my kalim and my svarim were stolen. But maybe only small svarim were stolen, and he's claiming large ones. Because it will say it's where I identify the particular svarim that were stolen. Maybe they were new ones and he's claiming old ones. Amrav kigon da amri halalu kelav shalploni. Kigon da amri halalu kelav shalploni halalav svaro shalploni. We'll say where the Shmuel went out that people are saying this is so and so's utensils, these are so and so's svarim. Yamarav haki. Did Rav really say this? supposed to say, again, remember the general principle the Mishnah is dealing with over here, the principle espoused in the Mishnah is that halacha l'maaseh, if I go and I see my property in the hands of another, and there's a shmua, there's a corresponding kol, a corresponding rumor or news in the town saying that my house was robbed, I have the right to go ahead and make the person who's holding my property swear that he purchased it, and once he tells me the purchase amount, I have the right to buy him out. I have the right to pay him what he purchased and get my property back. The Gemara is just pointing out that it's not just enough for me to make that claim, there has to be a corresponding kol. There has to be the corresponding news in the city that in fact I was robbed. Did Rav really say, so let's listen to this. Rav says that if a thief, a ganav, comes secretly at night and takes my utensils, potter. We'll say potter means, and this is amazing, he does not have to go ahead and pay me back. Why? My taima bedami kananu, because he acquired the kelim with his own blood. We'll say, I look at Rashi just a moment. Bedami kananu dehabab machteres bar misa hu kidichsev im machteres himatzi aganov. Also listen to this. The halacha is that if somebody were to break into your house at night, if you were to kill that individual, you would not be chayiv. You would not be chayiv. Which means that anyone who breaks into a home at night in order to go out and steal property is taking his own life in his hands. So there's almost like a quasi kimle b'derabimine happening over here. And since he was willing to risk his life, ultimately again he acquires the property. An interesting halacha. We don't paskin this way, but this is what Rav's shita. So the Gemara said, if that's the case that he acquires it, then l'maisa when he sells it, the seller shouldn't have to return it back to the owner either. To make that's only true in the case of the thief who comes in the middle of the night because he acquired the kli through his willingness to give up his life. Both in these cases, ultimately again, where the thief was not moser nefesh, so to speak. You see, by the way, the power of Mesiras Nefesh. Right? The power of Mesiras Nefesh is even for a Ganav. Right? The Ganav who's Moser Nefesh has a greater koach than a Ganav who's not Moser Nefesh. To which the Gemara says, Amarava, Lo Shana Ala Balabais Hasolimkar Kelev. So we'll say furthermore again, we're only saying this when it comes to a balabas who normally sells his utensils. Ava Balabai Shino Asu Limkar Kelev, Lo Sarich La Dure Ale Kulehai. But I will say ultimately again, for a balabas who does not normally sell his utensils, see, he does not need all of these criteria. So in other words, that when do you need to go ahead and have the call that the utensils were stolen and all the identification of the utensils? That's someone normally sells their stuff, and there's a concern that maybe there's seller's remorse. Therefore, I need this supporting information to back up his claim. But if a person doesn't normally sell his utensils, then l'maisa, again, he doesn't need all of this supporting information. V'dilma itzrich lezuze v'zabin. But maybe in this case he did sell it because he needed the money. So Amar Ravashi hariyatza lo shem geneva beer. So Ravashi says no, because remember there was a shem geneva. There was talk about a robbery in the city. Says the Gemara itmar ganav u'machar v'achar chokar aganov. So listen to this case. I will say something was stolen from me. Object was stolen from me, and it was sold. And after it was sold, Hooker Haganov, the thief was identified. So we'll say now in this case there are two parties. It turned out that Reuven stole it from me, but he sold it to Shimon. So now there's Reuven the thief, Shimon the buyer. So we'll say so now the shaila is what? The shaila is I want to get my utensil back. Who do I take it from? Who do I get it from? Not who do I get it from? Ultimately, who's on the hook for payment? So it says the Gemara, Rav. So Rav Mishmeid Rabbi Chia Amar Hadinim Arishon. So I say Rav says my claim is with the Ganav. My claim is with the Ganav. So what does that mean? Look at Rashi. Top line in Rashi. Hadinim Arishon. Dino Shabal Abayis Utviyasosh Ala Ganav Hi Ve'in Lalkeach Baldino Vimba Ligvosa Hemeno Yitain Damim. What this means is that my issue is with the Ganav. So what that means is if I want my Kli back, I want my Kli from Ruvain, or I should say from Shimon, so what do? I have to pay Shimon the money. Right? Shimon is an innocent bystander in all of this. I have to give Shimon the money, get my Kli back, and then what do? I sue the Ganav for the money I had to pay for my Kli. So that's according to Rav. My claim is with the Ganav. I can't seize the property from the buyer without paying him first. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, not true. I have my din is with the sheni. I could seize that utensil back from the purchaser and let the purchaser go ahead and take it up with the ganav. Rashi says, "Hadinem hasheni dino shabal abayis melokeachu v'yotze hemenu b'kreila b'chinas." So we'll say fundamental machlok. It's a really fascinating case. So remember, again, my stolen property is found to have been purchased by another individual. According to Rav, I can't just seize that from the purchaser, and if I want to take it from the purchaser, I have to pay him what he paid for it, and then I could sue the ganav for the money. According to Rabbi Yochanan, no, I could absolutely just seize my property. I could seize it from the purchaser and let the purchaser take it up with the ganav. Rav Yosef lo pligi. They're not arguing kan lifnei yeyosh hadin im hasheni, kan la'achar yeyosh hadin im harishon. To which the Gemara says, to which Rav Yosef says, they're not arguing. It depends. But if it's before yeyosh, meaning if the owner has not yet despaired of recovering the item, hadin im hasheni. So ultimately, you're going to both say in that case, before yeyosh, he's permitted to take it right from the purchaser, because since he still owns it, that is his property that is sitting in the hands of the purchaser. So he's permitted to just take it back without repaying and let the purchaser go back and take it up with the ganav. But I will say, if you already had yeyosh, then what? Then technically the purchaser has already acquired the item. If the purchaser has acquired the item, so if I want it back from the purchaser, I could buy it from him and then sue the ganav ultimately for payment. To which the Gemara says, "V'tarvayu isu de Rav Chisda," and I will say both of them hold of Rav Chisda. What's Rav Chisda? Rav Chisda says, Rashi says, "Gazov lo nesyai shu'abaylim," that I will say if an object was stolen from me and I, the owner, did not have yeush, uba achar va'achlo, and someone else went ahead and consumed the item. Ratza mizegova. I have the ability to go ahead and get repayment from either of these individuals. Is that true? That they do not argue? Ha matnos kuhuna kilifnei yeyoshtam. Yet they're both saying the case of matnos kuhuna, which we'll define in just a moment, is like the case of yeyosh. And yet we see that Rav and Rabbi Yochanan do disagree. This nan, because we learned Amar lo machar lo me'er shapara. Was I say to the butcher, sell me the insides, sell me the intestines of the kish, because really the insides of that cow. Vahayu behind matanos, and remember again, the halacha is that even when you shecht non-sacrificial animals, there is always an obligation to give certain portions of the animal to the Kohen. I purchased the insides of the animal, and the butcher never separated out the matnos kuhuna, the kohanic gifts. So what's the halacha? Nosnan l'kohen ve'ino menachalo min adamim. So I have to separate out the kohanic gifts, and I cannot go ahead and subtract anything from the purchase price from the butcher. From the butcher. So the Gemara says, however, lakach imenu b'mishkal. But if I purchase the insides of the animal based on weight, then nosnan l'kohen u'menachalo min adamim. Then I will say I give the separate out the kohanic portions, and I go ahead and I am permitted to deduct that amount ultimately from the purchase price. V'amarav, and Rav said, Lo shanu ela sheshakal yatzmo. We will say, when do we say this? Look at Rashi. Lo shanu lakach. We will say, second wide line on Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph. Lo shanu lakach hemenu b'mishkan nosin l'kohen. Nosin l'kohen. Timashadol keach akarchach nosin l'kohen. V'yitba damim min amocher. So we'll say, when do we say that ultimately, again, I have to go ahead and give it to the Kohen? When is that? So the Gemara says, that's only when I weighed it out myself. But I will say, if the butcher weighed it, hadin im hatavach, ultimately again, the halacha is with the butcher. So we'll say, what ema af din im hatavach. Say, no, the law is even with the butcher. We'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Hadin im hatavach, dino shal kohen v'iruro ala tavachu. What it means is that Lamaisa, the claim of the Kohen is not against me, but the claim of the Kohen ultimately again is against the butcher. And Rashi says, Rav l'tamei damar hadinim arishon, the tavach kiganav rishon v'lokeach avishis. So what do you see from here? So this is a case where the tabach, the butcher, is like the ganov, and we see from here ultimately again that his claim is against the rishon. To which the Gemara says, no, ima aftin ima talach. Rather, what it means is the Kohen even has a claim against the butcher. He certainly has a claim against me, the purchaser, because I am the one who's in possession of the meat right now. But he also has a claim against the butcher. Ma'adutem, what would I have thought? In matnos kunon exalos, I might have thought that kohanic gifts cannot be stolen at all. Kamash malon, yes, they can. Ula abayi damar pligi, b'may pligi. And about according to Abayi, he says that no, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan disagree. What do they disagree about? So the Gemara says, B'Rav Chisda. They disagree ultimately again regarding the shita of Rav Chisda. Rav Zvid Amar, Kegon shenes yaishu abaylim biyad lokeach, v'lo nes yaishu biyad ganav. Well, so Rav Zvid said the point of contention in Rav and Rabbi Yochanan is when the bailim, when the owners experienced Yeush, but the Yeush came about when the purchaser already purchased the item, but they did not have Yeush when the Ganav had stolen it. Ubahapli, again, this is what they argue about, will say. Mar Savar Yeush v'acharkach shinui rishus kani. One opinion holds that if Yeush comes first, and shinui rishus, change of domain, happens afterwards, then you acquire then the Ganav acquires the object. But shinui rishus va'achakach Yeush lo kani. But we'll say there's a shinui rishus, like in this case over here. Ultimately, again, the Ganav sells it to the purchaser, right? Then only afterwards is there Yeush. That does not affect acquisition. Umar Sav, the other opinion holds, no, Loshna, it doesn't make any distinction about say whether Shina Rishus or Yeush comes first. As long as both of them occur, the purchaser will acquire the object. Papa Amar, Biglima, Ducholi Amalo Pli, the Hadalemare. So let's say when it comes to, let's say if we're talking about a cloak, and let's say again the cloak was stolen and the cloak was sold, everyone will agree that's what? That glima, that cloak is returned to its owner. Bahacha, Ba'asubo takanas hashuk kamifligi. Rabbi say, what are they arguing about over here? Takanas hashuk. Rabbi say, now we are going to learn about something exceptionally important. Look at Rashi, takanas hashuk. Al shekanao lokeach b'shuk b'farhesya. V'lo haven bo shenignov. Asu lo takana sheishalim lo balabayis moser. Rabbi say, there's something called the takana of the marketplace. The takana of the marketplace is that if I buy goods in good faith, I buy an item in good faith. In other words, good faith means what Rabbi say? I have no reason to assume it's stolen. If you buy something and the seller is selling it dramatically below market, right? So there's like red flags that maybe there's something, that's one thing. I bought an item in total good faith. Total good faith. So what's the halacha? So then it turns out that the item itself is stolen. So what's the halacha? The halacha is that when the owner of the item comes to take it, the halacha is that he has to pay me for it. He has to pay me for it. They call this takana zashuk, the takana of the marketplace, because Rabbi say, if you don't put this takana in place, you'll limit people's willingness to engage in transactions. Because essentially, again, if there's no buyer protection, then Lamaisa, again, I'm going to be concerned because is it possible that this is stolen? It's possible that anything is stolen. And if there's nothing to protect me, I'm going to be very reticent. I mean, obviously people have to buy certain. I'm going to be reticent to go ahead and give my money. Therefore, to protect the buyer and to allow for essential, free commerce, the halacha protects the buyer. That if you bought in good faith and it turns out that it was stolen, if the owner wants his object back, he has to pay you the money and he gets it back. He then takes his claim ultimately against the thief to reclaim the money that he spent. So I will say, so therefore the halacha, Rab Mishmeit, Rab Chia Amar, Hadinim Arishon. So Rab, in the name of Rab Chia, said that the halacha, the din is with the Rishon, meaning the owner's din, his claim is against the thief. So the Gemara says, Dina de lokeach, the lishkol zuzim iganav. Ultimately, the lokeach, the purchaser, should really get his money back from the Ganav. And they did not enact Takanas Hashuk over here. Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yanai Amar, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yanai said, Hadinim Hasheni, that ultimately, again, the owner's claim is against the second individual, against the purchaser. Dina de lokeach, and therefore he should be able to take it without any money. Dina de lokeach, the lishkol mi balabayis. I will say ultimately again that the lokeach should be able to reclaim it from the balabas. Va'asubo takanas hashuk, and they enacted the takanas hashuk in this case. The Sava Rav lo asubo takanas hashuk. I will say, does Rav actually hold that they did not enact takanas hashuk over here? V'harav huna talmidei di Rav Hava. So let's listen to this. That Rav Huna was a Talmud of Rav. The Chanan Bisha. We'll say a guy named Chanan Bisha. So Hanan is his name. Bisha means bad guy. So that's what he was known. Hanan, the bad guy. Ganav Glima. We'll say he stole a cloak. Vizabno, and he sold it to another party. Aslik mid Rav Huna. So the owner of the cloak came before Rav Huna. Amar le'elahu Gavra. Zil Shari Abitach. Go ahead and take your object. Right? Zil Shari Abitach. Rashi says, Hater mashkonech kolomar. And I will say now what he told the seller, what he told the owner was, go and buy back your property. So you want your cloak back? you have to go and buy it back from the purchaser. To which the Gemara says, what's happening over here? Shiny Chanan Bisha, Kevan Deleka Lishtalume Mine, Kilo Hooker Dummy. We'll say the difference over here with Chanan Bisha is that since it would be impossible to get repayments from him, because apparently he was a very powerful individual, so this is the equivalent of a case, ultimately, again, where we did not know who the thief was. And Bosa, everyone will agree that what? In a case where you don't know who the thief was, the owner of the object will have to pay the purchaser the amount that he paid for the object in order to go ahead and get his object back. Amar Rava, so as Rava said, Im gana maforsamu lo asabo takanas hashuk. And this is very interesting. If you bought an object from a ganav maforsam, if you bought it from a known ganav, there is no buyer protection in that case. So I go ahead and I buy it from Joe the Ganav. That's the name of his store, right? Joe the Ganav. So again, I'm saying in a case like that, there's no buyer protection because I should have known that I'm buying stolen property, and therefore, again, if the owner shows up, the owner is not obligated to pay me for what I paid for the object. He can just take back his object. What about the case of Chanan Bisha? That's a case of a known ganav. Yet, and both say they enacted takanas hashuk in that case. So we'll say Chanan Bisha was a bad guy in many ways, but he was not known to be a thief. See, he did many other bad things, but he was not necessarily known to be a thief. Itmar ganavu para b'chovo ganavu para b'akifo. But listen to this case. I went ahead and I stole an object, and I used the stolen object to pay off my debt, or I used the stolen object to pay off my credit, meaning I bought something on credit, and so I paid it off. So what's the halacha? Lo asubo takanas hashuk. So both say, so now watch this case. I borrowed $1,000 from Ruvain, and I went ahead and I stole a Rolex. I go ahead and I take the Rolex and I pay back Ruvain. Now the owner of the Rolex comes along to Ruvain and wants to take back his watch. The halacha the Gemara is saying over here is that takanas hashuk, buyer protection, doesn't apply to Ruvain in that case. Why not? The Amri lav adaita dahano yohavis lemidi. Because we say to Ruvain, you didn't lend Silber that money on the das of that watch. In other words, you lent him that money not knowing that the watch was going to come or not. Therefore, I'm going to say you can't claim buyer protection in that kind of case. Mashkanta shavi mason b'mea. So we'll say ultimately again, if a person gave another a stolen mashkon worth 200, and as a result he lent him 100, and we'll say that is the case ultimately where we would claim takanas hashuk. Why? Because essentially what the Gemara is saying is like this: it's only in a case where an exchange of funds was made because the person thought that he was actually acquiring title to the object that takanas hashuk is made. But if a stolen property was used for repayment for something, and then it turns out that the object was stolen, so the person who was repaid can't claim takanas hashuk under those circumstances. Ameimar Amar. So Ameimar said, Ameimar Amar lo asubo takanas hashuk. I'm sorry, shava b'shava. If both say if equal items were exchanged, then lemais. Again, look at Rashi. Mashkanta shava b'shava. Ein derach lasos kein lahavos ala mashkon kol shavyav. So both say if let's say again I lent someone or someone lent me money and I gave them a mashkon of the same value, we don't apply takanas hashuk in that particular situation. Okay, I'm sorry, I just lost the place. Fine. Rav Sheshis Amar lo asava takanas hashuk. Rav Amar asava takanas hashuk. So we'll say it's machlokes as to whether or not they made takanas hashuk in that case. And I will say what is that? What is the halacha? Bekulu asava takanas hashuk. I will say Chazal apply takanas hashuk buyer protection in all cases. Lebar meganav upara bechovo. So both say takanas hashuk buyer protection applies in all cases with one exception. The only exception is where I stole property and I used it to pay off a debt, or I used it to pay off credit. So both say why does buyer protection not apply in that case? Because Lamaisa, since the loan was not made with any kind of reliance on the stolen object, therefore you can't claim buyer protection in that situation. So both say just this, because I want you to walk away with something from this halacha. This indeed is halacha Lamaisa. This actually is a very important halacha. So the Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat Siman Shin Nun Vav Sif Ches writes the following: Halokeach miganav she'ino mefursam. Both say if I purchase property from a ganav who is not well known, Oh, he's only in the minor leagues of Gandvos, right? He hasn't made it yet. So I'll say the point over here is, I remember, this goes back, if you buy property from a known Ganov, there's no recourse. Meaning there's no recourse for you to reclaim the money you spent. You should have known better. But assuming that I bought from a Ganov who I did not know was a Ganov, and the truth is, I really had no way of knowing that he was a Ganov. Bein shalakach mimeno shavamana b'masayim o shavamana b'masayim. Rabbi, harei notel hadami mi balabayis, va'achakach machzir hagneva mipnei takanas hashik moshe. Suppose this is halacha l'maisa. I go ahead and I purchase property, or not property. I purchase an item. It doesn't matter what. I purchase an item. The owner of the item says, "That's my item. It was stolen from me." I say, "I'm so sorry." The owner does not have the right simply to take it back, but rather, again, the owner has to go ahead and pay me the amount that I paid for the object, and then the owner then goes ahead and takes the claim up with the ganav. This is what we call takanas hashok. Says the Gemara. Avimi bar Nazi, Chamod Ravin Hava. Supposed to listen to this. So Avimi bar Nazi was the father-in-law of Ravina. Hava Masik Bahu Gavra Arba Zuzi. Supposed to he lent a particular man 4 zuzim. Ganav Glima Asi and Nehile. So what happened? So the borrower stole a cloak. The borrower stole a cloak, and he went ahead and he brought it back to the creditor. And as a result, the creditor went ahead and Osve Arba Zuzi Achrini. He lent him another 4 zuz. L'sof Hokar Agana. So at the end of the day, it was discovered that the cloak was stolen. Asla Kamid Ravina. So they came before Ravina. So now the Shaila was the following. Amr, Kamai Ganav, Upara Bechova, Velo Boila Meisale. So for the first 4 zuz, that's the equivalent of that he was paying back the first 4 zuz, ultimately with what? With stolen property. And remember again, we just established before that what? That for payment of a debt, the creditor is not covered under the Takanas Hashok. Right? You're not covered under Takanas Hashok. However, again, Velo Boila Meisale, Velo Midi. And therefore, again, the owner of the cloak is not obligated to reimburse the creditor for the first 4 zuz. However, Hanach Arba Zuzi Achrini, Shakal Zuzach V'Hadr Glimi. For the second 4 zuz, remember, the second 4 zuz were lent based on what? Those were lent based on the cloak. Anytime someone takes action based on the property, ultimately they are covered by Takanas. See here this interesting case. So remember again, so the lender lends 4 zuz. Borrower goes and steals a cloak, brings it back to the lender. The cloak is worth more than 4 zuz. So since he's some part of the cloak, ultimately is supposed to repayment for the first part of the debt, and then the rest of the value of the cloak was the security to borrow more money based on that. So now the Gemara says for the first 4 zuz, the creditor is not covered by Takanas Hashok, because Lamaisa, that money was not lent based on the cloak, because the cloak was not yet in existence. But for the second 4 zuz, he absolutely is covered by Takanas Hashok, because Lamaisa, again, that money was only lent based on the reliance on the cloak. Maskeh Rav Cohen, so we'll say Rav Cohen raised the following kasha: Vidilma Glima Bahani Zuzi Kama Yahavne Mehile. But ultimately, again, let's assume, why can't we assume, that the cloak was given as a result of those first 4 zuzim? That is true, but that being the case, that becomes a case of Ganavu Para Bechovo, Ganavu Para Be'kevo. Both say that is still paying back a debt with stolen property, which is not covered by Takanas Hashok. Varba Zuze Basrai Hamune Hemene Kiheche de Hemne Meikara. So we'll say, so therefore again, but I should say that the second 4 zuz that were given, so Hemune Hemne, ultimately again they're given based on the fact that there was a security of the first 4 zuz put there. So we'll say, so the matter escalated and it came before Rabbi Avua. So Rabbi Avua, this case came before Rabbi Avua. Amar, Rabbi Avua said, Hilchasa Kirav Kohen. We'll say the halacha is like Rav Kohen. So we'll say, so that is also halacha l'maisa. Listen to this. Shulchan Aruch paskins hayanoshe beganav me'azuz. So veganav vehevi lebalchov v'nasal mea acherim hari agneva chazeres leba'aleh v'omrim lech v'tava Hagana b'masayim shonasata lo hamea ha'achir mepnei ha'chefetz shehevi bilvad. So we'll say, so bottom line, without getting into the technicalities of this case, if lender lends the borrower $100, and then ultimately again borrower steals a piece of property that's worth $200, let's say. He goes there, he gives him the property, and then lender lends the borrower another $100. once he received the object. So that's an interesting halacha. So now what happens? It turns out that it's stolen. Owner shows up, we'll call it a cloak, wants his item back. So lender says, no problem, but it's going to cost you $200. So what's the halacha? Rabbi say for the first 100, the lender cannot claim against the owner of the item. Why? Because the Maisa, again, remember, he did not lend that first $100 based on the item. Why? Because the item was not yet in existence as far as the lender was concerned at the time of the original loan. However, the second $100 was absolutely lent based on the item. Therefore, in that case over here, the lender will be able to recapture under Takanas Hashuk the second 100, but not the first 100. That's the halacha of Rav Cohen. Fine. Next, the Gemara says, Narsha Ganav Sifra Zabne Lapapuna. So we'll say there was a Narshon. These are national identities or tribal, national identities. And Narsha, so a guy from Narsha, and Narshain stole a book, Zavne le Papunoin, and he sold it to a Papunoin, Betimnin Zuzi. And we'll say he sold it to the Papunoin for 80 zuz. Azul Papunoin, Zavne le Bar Mechuza, B'mea ve'esrim Zuzi. So we'll see what happened. The Papunoin went ahead and sold it to a guy from Mechuza for 120 zuz. So the Sof Hokar Ganav, Rabbi say, then after a certain amount of time the Ganav was recognized, meaning they saw it was stolen property. Amra Abaye, Lezel Mari de Safra. So we'll say now the owner of the book wants to go and retrieve his book from the guy from Mechuza, who had bought the book for 120 zuz, from the Paponoe, who had bought it from the Narsham for 80 zuz. It's like Chagaja. Right, so what happens? So Amr Abai, so we'll say, so what do we do over here? Amr Abai, Lezel Mari the Safra of the Yovle the Bar Mechuza Tamnin Zuzi. So we'll say, the owner of the book should go to the guy from Mechuza and pay him 80 zuz. 80 zuz, v'shakel safrei, and he should go ahead and take his sefer. V'azil bar mechuza, v'shakel arbon mi papunoi, and let the bar mechuza go back and reclaim the remaining 40 from the guy from Papunoi. Maskef la Rava. So Rava said, 1 second, hashta lokeach mi ganav asabo takanas hashuk, lokeach mi boy. We'll say, I don't understand. If you make a takanas hashuk for the guy who purchased from the ganav himself, then all the more so what? Takanas hashuk should apply to someone who purchased from a legitimate purchaser. In this case, the Bar Mechuza really didn't do anything wrong. Because who's the Bar Mechuza buying it from? He's buying it from the Papunoi, and it was the Papunoi who bought it from the thief who was the Narsha. So the Mechuza is 2 steps removed from the Geneva. So if you can tell me that Takanas Hashuk applies to the person who mamish purchased it from the Ganav, then what? All the more so the individual purchased it from a legitimate buyer should be covered as well. If that's the case, then Lemaisa, the owner of the book, should have to pay the guy from Mechuza what? 120 zuz. Let him pay the full amount. Why only the 80? To which the Gemara says, now, in reality, you're right. Also, because of Takanas Hashuk, the owner of the Sefer needs to pay the Bar Mechuza 120 zuz. The Shakel Safra, then he can take a Sefer. V'lezel Mari de Safra, v'lishkol arba'in mi papunoi, v'timnin min arsha. Then Rabbi will say, what ends up happening? Then the owner of the book collects repayment for his Sefer in 2 stages. He goes back and he collects ultimately again 80 from the Papunah, and he goes ahead and 40 from the Papunah, and he takes the 80 ultimately again from the Narsha. So in this case over here, the last purchaser will be covered by Takanas Hashuk. The owner of the object pays him the 120, and the owner has to go back and reclaim 40 and 80 from the thief, and ultimately 40 from the first purchaser. Master Mishnah. Zeba b'chaviso sheyayin, v'zeba b'kado shel dvash. So we actually alluded to this case a little bit at the end of yesterday's daf. So we'll say I come with my barrel of wine, and Reuven's coming with his barrel of honey. Nistika chaviso shel dvash. So we'll say what happens. So the assumption by the Mishnah over here is that honey. Actually, we'll see. Fine, let's just go with no Rashi yet over here. So what happens? So Reuven's barrel of honey breaks. So what do? I pour out my wine in order to save Reuven's honey. So we'll say, so let's make the assumption over here that honey is more valuable than wine. So what's talach? Ein lo ela schoro. So we'll say the halacha is I cannot claim the value of my lost wine from Reuven The only thing I could claim against Reuven, Rabbi say, is the value of my time. In other words, I did labor, so to speak, right? I collected all of his honey, so I could claim payment ultimately again for my time that was worked and for usage of my utensil, but I cannot claim against him for the value of my wine. V'im Amar, but if I say to him, listen, I'll save your honey. If what? If you pay me back the value of my wine, then chayav litino. Then enochinami under those circumstances. So ultimately, again, Reuven will be chayav to give back the value of my wine. Shataf nachal chamoro v'chamar shachavero. We'll say I'm walking with Reuven, and the river sweeps away my donkey and Reuven's donkey. Shalo yafem mana v'shachavero masayim. My donkey is only worth a mana, and Reuven's is worth much more. So I let my donkey drown, and I go ahead and I save Reuven's. So we'll say, I can't claim from Reuven the value of my lost donkey. The only thing I can claim from is the value for the work I performed for him. But if I say to Reuven, listen, Reuven, I will save your donkey as long as you promise to pay me back for the value of mine, then what? Chayav liteno. Then indeed Reuven is chayav to go ahead and give me back the value of my donkey. But why is this? Leima leimef kera kazachina. But say, listen to this. So the Gemara asks a very interesting question. Now, the interesting question over here is, why is it in a case, let's say, where Reuven's barrel breaks and his honey is pouring out, and I pour out my wine and collect his honey? The Gemara posits over here, I should actually be able to take the honey for myself. Why? Because Lamaisa, again, the honey becomes hefker. But say, why is the honey hefker? Rashi says, V'leima mehefkera zavina, dvash shalcha hayaholich kula li'ibud. But at the end of the day, your honey is pouring all over the Rosh Hashanah. So the Maisa again, Harini kimatzal mina hefker. At that point in time, it effectively becomes hefker. So when I save it, in reality, I acquire it. Did we not learn? So we'll say, listen to this. If I was carrying barrels of wine or barrels of oil, then and I saw that the barrels are breaking. Lo yomar hariz truma u'maisra apeir shishli b'sok beisi ve'im amar lo amar klum. Listen to this chav. I see my barrels are breaking. I say, okay, truma, they're truma. And let's say, so again, remember the great chap of that is that if they're lost, I don't have to bear the loss. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that. And if you did so, ve'im amar lo amar klum. And I will say, ultimately, again, if you did so, you did not say a thing. And I will say, now, what does that show you? Now, I understand why you shouldn't do it. But it doesn't just say you shouldn't do it. What does it say? It says you can't do it. Why? Because I will say, once that barrel is breaking, that wine is spilling out, it's hefker. It's essentially ownerless. So that's why, again, not only shouldn't I do it, I can't do it because I no longer own that wine. So therefore, again, plugging that into the Mishnah, if Reuven's barrel breaks and his honey's pouring out all over the place, I should be able to acquire that honey myself because it's effectively hefker. Oh, so which Rabbi Yomi said, what's the case of Osai? Where there's netting over the barrel. There's netting over the barrel. So we'll say that netting effectively prevents the contents from spilling out all over the place, meaning the barrel is breaking and it's pouring out at a slower rate so that I could still salvage the contents. So we'll say when that netting is on top of the barrel, that prevents the contents from spilling out quickly. Therefore, again, it's still retrievable. Because it's retrievable, therefore it's not hefker. V'im amar lo amar klum. So we'll say, is that true? Let's go back for just a moment. So now you told me, if my barrels are breaking in Rosh Hashanah, and I call out their truma, that what I said is an ineffective designation. Is that true? V'hatanyo, mi shebaba derech umos, v'yadav anos connected. But listen to this case. I'm walking on the road, and I have money in my pocket, and I see a robber coming across from me. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? Meaning, I think I'm about to get robbed. So what happens? Lo yomar, hare peros sheyesh li b'soch beisi, michulalim al ma'os halalos. We'll listen to this chaf. So I can't say, you know what? I've got $100 in my pocket. Let the fruit that's in my home, that I was going to separate out Shumas and Maestros on, let that sanctity be deconsecrated and let the sanctity devolve upon these coins. Others will say, what I want to do is I want to redeem the sanctity of my produce with the coins in my pocket. Now, what's my cheshbon? My cheshbon is I'm about to be robbed. So at least if I'm going to be robbed, let it be the Kohen who endures the loss and not me. So what's the halacha? Rabbi say you should not say this. You shouldn't do this. V'im amar dvar kayamin. Oh, but Rabbi say if you did it, what? It works. So you see from here that it does work. Hakama asking, what's the case over here? Rabbi say the case over here is where I think I'm about to be mugged, but it's also possible that I'll be able to get myself out of this circumstance. So therefore, Rabbi say because it's not a definitive loss, therefore, I'm permitted to make this designation. Rabbi say, but if it's a case where I'm able to save myself, so then why lechatchila can't I designate this money as my kodesh money? To which the Gemara says, because I'll say the case over here is where I could save myself, but it's not so pashut. Meaning, I know that there can be a favorable outcome over here, but I'm not exactly sure how this is going to play out. To which the Gemara says, I will say now, is that true that in every case where there is going to be a potential hefsid, that you should not make these type of cheshbonos, where you go ahead and you designate items as consecrated property? Vatanya will say, we learned, shahayu lo eser chavio shel tevel tamei. So we'll say if a person had 10 barrels of tevel that was tamei, v'ra achas, remember tevel's untied produce, v'ra achas men shenishpro sheniskala, and I saw one of them broke, or we'll say was uncovered. So we'll remember again, the issue of uncovered is the issue of megulin, of mashkin megulin. Remember again, uncovered, so liquids that are left uncovered overnight, ultimately again cannot be used because of gzira mashkin megulin, because of the fear that a snake may come and inject its venom into it. So what's the halacha? Omer harehi truma, girehi trumas meiser, al teisha. So we'll say you could go ahead and designate this one barrel as trumas meiser on the 9 others. Ubishemen lo ya'asekem ibnei hefsid kohen. We'll say you shouldn't do this by oil because of the loss that it'll cause the kohen. So we'll discuss what that means in just a little bit. So we'll say, so you see that you can do it. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, what's the case? Even though the barrels are broken, because we'll say ultimately the case over here is where the netting of the press of the olive press, of the wine press, is on top of it. So because the netting is on top of it, therefore what? The loss is not definite because the contents won't spill out all at once. They'll only trickle out slowly but surely. So we'll say Bishlam Shnishbra. We'll say we're going to stop over here for just a moment because I'll record the rest, but early today, Mir Hashem. But I want to share with you just a short vart on the parsha. So we'll say we're stopping here a little bit mid sugya, But again, I will record the rest. Short idea on the. So we continue on Kuf Tesvav 115b. We left off in the middle of the daf. The Gemara says Bishlama, pretty much right in the middle of the page. Middle of the page. Bishlama shnishbara chazio. Se'ef, remember we're talking about the case of the eser chavios shel tevel tomei, the 10 barrels of the tevel that's tomei. So the Gemara says bishlamash nishbara chazio. So if the barrel breaks, then ultimately again the wine that is saved could still be used by a kohen. Because remember the way the Gemara set it up is that the situation is that the wine is being held in, or the top of the barrel has some type of netting that prevents all of the wine from spilling out immediately. But if the wine ultimately is, if there's gilui means it's uncovered, then what is it usable for? Meaning with pashtos, once you leave liquids uncovered overnight, they become fundamentally unusable. Maybe you'll say that even if it's not usable for drinking or consumption, it's usable for ziluf. Ziluf means sprinkling. So what they would do is they would sprinkle wine in their homes to create a pleasant scent. But yet we learned that water that was left uncovered should not be spilled in Rosh Hashanah, nor should they be used to go ahead and create mortar. Nor should one go ahead and use them. Yerbat ben Azabayis means they used to have dirt floors, so they would sprinkle water on the floors to keep the dirt down. And you should not use it to water your animals. Not your friend's animal either. So you see from here that even liquids that were left uncovered, the idea still is one is not supposed to use it out of concern that if there's venom there, that venom could enter the body through other ways. To which the Gemara answers, the avar le b'masnenes. The case is where you put the liquid through a masnenes. Masnenes is a sieve or a strainer. The idea is that if there is venom in there, ultimately it would come out. The Gemara says, Kirab Nechemia, because ultimately the Brisa says that even if you strain the liquid, there is still an issue ultimately of Gilui. There's still an issue of the venom. Rabbi Nechemia, when is that true? That's only true if the lower utensil in which you are pouring the contents into is open. But ultimately, if it's the lower receptacle, the receptacle that you're pouring it into, that has the sieve or the strainer or the cloth that's straining, then you could strain out the venom. Ein ba mishum gilui, lefi sha'aras shal nachash domer l'sfug, v'tzaf va'omed bimkomo. Because ultimately, again, snake venom is like a sponge, and it will float up. It floats really on the wine, and it will remain in place. To which the Gemara says, "Itmar Allah, Amar Reb Sinan, Amar Reb Shimon Levi, lo shanu ella shalo tarko." Furthermore, the Gemara says this is only true. Reb Shimon Levi says this is only true when you didn't mix the wine after it was left uncovered. Aval tarku aser, but ultimately if one did mix the wine after the gilui, then the wine would be aser because the venom would get mixed in. Hasam nami afshar temanach midi apuma de chavisa de shafile. To which the Gemara says here, there's also another possibility that you could place an item. So they're talking over here about like not a sieve or not a strainer, but more like a cloth that would have been used as a type of filter, and you would put that on the opening of the receptacle and pour the wine through that. Ultimately, again, if you pour the wine, Rashi points out that this only works if the wine is poured slowly, then the venom will come out. To which the Gemara says, but 1 second. But according to Rabbi Nechemia, ultimately again, can we go ahead and separate truma from tevel that is tamei? So the Gemara says, "V'hatanya tarmin mina tamei ala tamei." You could separate out truma from that which is tamei, or you could separate truma from tamei. You could separate truma mina tamei al hatamei. So you could go ahead and use tamei produce to go ahead and separate out truma smeiser from that which is tamei as well. Umina tahor al hatamei. You could take from that which is tar and that which is tamei. Umina tahor al hatamei. Avalo min hatamei al hatar. But you cannot go ahead and separate out from that which is tamei to rectify that which is tar. Rabbi Nechemia says, af min hatamei al hatamei lo hitiru litrum. So Rabbi Nechemia says that even for that which is tamei, on that which is tamei, you cannot go ahead and take that as truma. Elo b'shel demai. The only place you could do this, Rabbi says, is in a situation of demai. So remember again, demai refers to produce of an amo aretz that midrabanon is treated as untithed produce. Even on midaraisa, we could assume that even ame haaretz in fact do take trumas and maestros. Hachanami b'shel demai. Fine. Amar ub'shemen lo yasek im mehefsid kohen. So remember again, the Gemara said that you could go ahead and separate out from the barrel of tameh of tevel that is tameh. You can separate out trumas meiser, but one should not do this ultimately with oil. So what's the pshat? The Gemara said because it represents a hefsed, a loss to the coin. Ma'ishno shemen. So we'll say, why is it that shemen is treated differently than wine? Deroi lahadlik, because ultimately shemen is not only usable for consumption, but shemen is also usable for illumination purposes. You could kindle it. So therefore, again, its loss represents something much more significant. Yain nami roi lazelov. But 1 second, wine also has another purpose other than just consumption. Wine could be used for the sprinkling to create a nice smell in the house. V'chitemo zelov lav nilsihi. So maybe you'll say that sprinkling is not significant. V'amar shmo mishra bichia. Bet shmo sneim rabichia shosin milug b'sela or mizalfin milug b'shtayim. So it's interesting. Bichia said that wine that we could buy a lug of drinking wine for a sela, but wine that you use for sprinkling for aromatic purposes, you would pay 2. So you see that the value of wine for scent purposes, in fact, is even more expensive than wine that is used for drinking purposes. To which the Gemara says, "Hachama askinon." What's the case over here? Hachama askinon bechadash. We're talking about new wine. So new wine, because it's new, doesn't have really a developed aroma. So because of that, it wasn't usually used for sprinkling. So, but one second, but even if it's new now, you could hold on to it for a while and it will become suitable for aromatic purposes. Asi be lide takola. To which the Gemara says, well, we don't want to hold on to this type of wine that is tummy, because one may go ahead and accidentally consume it, and if one consumes it, one is ingesting truma that is tamei. Shemen ami asi be lidei takala. But one second, shemen also, you could go ahead and come to some type of obstacle, to some, meaning you could end up making a mistake with it as well. To which the Gemara says, no, because the shemen you're going to put in a disgusting utensil, so you won't come to use it. Yain nami manoch le beklimos. So one second, but wine you could also put in a klimos, in a disgusting kli, and perhaps that will prevent you from inadvertently using it. Hashta lezeluf kaboile biklimanos kamachle. So it doesn't make sense, because if you're going to potentially use it for sprinkling, would you go ahead and put it in a klimos? And of course, the answer to that is no. So we'll say so, because obviously by putting in a klimos, that would take away its ability to have a nice scent. So we'll stop over here, and Emir Hashem will pick up with this takala. Now the next part of the Gemara is going to be takala atzma tanaihi. The notion is, now the Gemara is going to end off with this sugya. Well, I should say we'll pick up with this sugya, which is the notion of holding on to things that are prohibited out of a concern that if one retains possession of these items, one may come to inadvertently go ahead and transgress. So whether or not it is prohibited to hold on to things that are prohibited, lest you come to use them, we're going to see Machlokes Tanoim, which Emir Hashem will continue with tomorrow. Thus, I wishing all of you a wonderful, restful, and peaceful Shabbos. Looking forward to continuing the daf tomorrow.